I grew up believing I had the perfect family. My parents Jennifer and Michael Thompson met at University of Michigan in 1985, got married in a beautiful ceremony in Ann Arbor, and by 1990 they were ready to start a family, and that's when I came along, Emily Marie Thompson, born on a crisp October morning at St. Joseph Mercy Hospital. At least that's the story I was told. And my childhood was everything a kid could want. We lived in a charming colonial house in a quiet Detroit suburb called Birmingham with a white picket fence and a swing set in the backyard. My dad worked as an architect designing beautiful homes. My mom stayed home until I started school, then became a librarian at the Baldwin Public Library. Every summer we'd drive up north to a small cabin on Lake Michigan that had been in my dad's family for generations, swimming in the freezing cold water, fishing off the dock, building bonfires on the beach, and roasting marshmallows until our faces were sticky with chocolate. And then there was Aunt Susan, who was my favorite relative. She wasn't really my aunt but my mom's best friend from college, the kind of friend who was more like a sister. They'd met freshman year as roommates and had been inseparable ever since. She'd been there when my parents got married, standing beside my mom as her maid of honor, been in the delivery room when I was born holding my mom's hand and even cutting the umbilical cord, and had been a constant presence in my life ever since. She lived in Chicago about 4 hours away but visited at least once a month. She had a key to our house and used it freely, letting herself in on Friday evenings with a bottle of wine for my mom, a six-pack for my dad, and a giant bag of presents for me. She never missed my birthday or school plays or dance recitals or soccer games. Sat in the front row at my kindergarten graduation crying harder than my actual mother. Taught me how to ride a bike running behind me in the summer heat, refusing to let go until I found my balance. Taught me how to bake chocolate chip cookies, showing me how to cream the butter and sugar just right and how to tell when they were done by the smell alone. Taught me how to apply makeup when I was 13 and convinced I looked like a monster, sitting with me in front of my bedroom mirror for hours until I felt beautiful. She was fun in a way that parents weren't allowed to be. Let me stay up late watching R-rated movies and eat ice cream for breakfast when my mom wasn't looking, and buy me the kind of clothes my mom said were inappropriate for a girl your age. She took me on Aunt Niece trips to Chicago, shopping on Michigan Avenue and deep dish pizza at Giordano's and the Shed Aquarium and the Field Museum and Navy Pier. She let me have sips of her wine coolers when I was 16 and thought I was so grown up. And my friends would say, "You're so lucky to have an aunt like that," and I knew they were right. I loved Aunt Susan more than almost anyone in the world, but I never thought to question why she was so present in my life, why she never got married, why she never had children of her own, why she always looked at me with such intense, almost painful love in her eyes, the kind of love that seemed too big, too deep, too overwhelming for just an aunt. I was a kid, and kids don't question love, they just accept it. But the first crack appeared when I was 16. I was a junior in high school taking AP US History and had a massive research project on our family histories. I needed my birth certificate to start the research. My mom kept all the important documents in a fireproof safe in her closet: birth certificates, social security cards, passports, the deed to the house, marriage certificates, old tax returns. And she'd shown me where the key was years ago, hanging on a small hook behind her dresses. I found my birth certificate easily enough. Emily Marie Thompson, born October 12, 1990 at St. Joseph Mercy Hospital. Parents Jennifer and Thompson and Michael William Thompson. Everything exactly as I expected, but underneath it was another certificate tucked beneath mine, slightly yellowed with age, the edges soft from handling. I pulled it out curiously, expecting maybe my parents' marriage certificate or my dad's birth certificate. Instead, I found myself staring at Susan Marie Patterson, born October 15, 1967 in Chicago, Illinois. Parents Robert and Patricia Patterson. Aunt Susan's birth certificate. I stared at it for a long moment, confused why my mom would have that. It seemed like an oddly personal document to keep in your fireproof safe. It's not like people just handed over their birth certificates for safekeeping. I thought about asking my mom at dinner that night, but something stopped me, a strange gut-level feeling that I shouldn't mention it, that I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see, that the answer might be complicated. I put it back exactly where I found it and pretended I'd never seen it, but I didn't forget, and over the next few years I started noticing things I'd never noticed before. It was like someone had turned on a light in a dark room and suddenly I could see all the furniture I'd been bumping into my whole life, like how Aunt Susan and I had the same smile, The exact same smile with the lip curving higher on the left side and eyes crinkling at the corners and a tiny dimple on our right cheek that only appeared when we really meant it, like how we had the same laugh, a little too loud, a little too enthusiastic, the kind of laugh that made people turn their heads in restaurants. My dad always teased me about it, saying, "You laugh just like Susan, it's like having two of her in the room," like how we had the same weird habit of twirling our hair when we were nervous or thinking hard. I'd catch myself doing it during exams, during awkward conversations, during moments of stress, and I'd look over at Aunt Susan and there she'd be doing the exact same thing. Like how in every baby photo of me Aunt Susan was holding me, not my mother. There I was as a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket nestled in Susan's arms while she gazed down at me with an expression of pure overwhelming love. There I was at my first birthday party sitting on Susan's lap while she helped me smash the cake. There I was at my third birthday, my fifth, my seventh, Susan always in the frame, always holding me, always looking at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. Like how my mother never breastfed me. When I casually mentioned that to a friend in college, she looked at me strangely and said, "Didn't you think that was weird? I mean, most moms at least try. Didn't she ever talk about it?" I shrugged it off. My mom had always said she had trouble producing milk. It happens, no big deal. But the questions kept coming. Why did Aunt Susan always get so emotional on my birthday? Why did she cry at my high school graduation harder than anyone, including my actual parents? Why did she call me every Sunday at exactly 4 p.m. without fail for as long as I could remember? And why did she sound slightly relieved every time I answered, as if she'd been holding her breath waiting to hear my voice? Why did my grandmother, my father's mother, a proper New England woman named Eleanor, always seem slightly cold toward Aunt Susan? Why did she change the subject whenever Susan's name came up? Why did she look at Susan with something that seemed almost like guilt when she thought no one was watching? Why did my mother and Aunt Susan share a look, sometimes a quick loaded glance, when certain topics came up, like pregnancy, like childbirth, like mothers and daughters, like the summer of 1990? Why did they seem to have a whole secret language of eye contact and subtle nods, a way of communicating without words that I could sense but never understand? I was 25 when I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding for nearly a decade. I got married on a beautiful June afternoon in 2015 to Christopher Davis. I'd met him 3 years earlier at a coffee shop in downtown Detroit. I was reading a book, he spilled his latte on my table, apologized profusely, bought me a replacement, and somehow talked me into giving him my number. We were engaged within 2 years, and by the third we were standing in front of our families and friends, promising forever. The ceremony was held in the same church where my parents had married 30 years earlier. Kirk in the Hills, a stunning stone church overlooking a lake in Bloomfield Township. The stained glass windows caught the afternoon sun and scattered rainbow light across the pews. The organist played the same processional my mother had walked down the aisle to. It felt like tradition, like continuity, like I was carrying on something beautiful. The reception was at a gorgeous country club just outside Detroit with sweeping views of the golf course, a live band, and more food than anyone could possibly eat. I wore my mother's wedding dress, the same lace gown she'd worn in 1987, carefully preserved and altered to fit me. She cried when I tried it on for the first time. We both did. Aunt Susan was there, of course. She was my matron of honor. She'd flown in from Chicago 3 days early to help with last-minute preparations. She'd held my hand through every moment of wedding stress, calmed me down when the florist messed up the centerpieces, and made me laugh when I was on the verge of tears. She'd helped me into my mother's wedding dress, zipping it up with trembling fingers, and when I turned to look at her, her eyes were wet. She whispered, "You're so beautiful, the most beautiful bride I've ever seen." As I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, I saw her in the front row, tears streaming down her face, and my mother beside her holding her hand, crying too. They looked like two women sharing a profound private moment, one that had nothing to do with the wedding happening around them. At the reception, after too much champagne and too many emotional speeches, I found myself standing with Aunt Susan on the terrace overlooking the golf course. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the kind of perfect Michigan sunset that makes you believe in magic. She was holding my hand, telling me how proud she was of the woman I'd become, how happy she was that I'd found Christopher, how she knew we'd have a beautiful life together, and she said, "I love you so much, Emily, more than you'll ever know." Something in her tone made me pause, made me really look at her. She was 63 then, still beautiful, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and kind brown eyes that were the exact same shade as my own. She'd aged gracefully, her face lined with laugh marks and the gentle weathering of a life well lived. She'd never married, never had children, always pouring her love into me, her best friend's daughter, and I asked, "Why didn't you ever have kids? You would have been such an amazing mom, you're so good with children, so patient and loving. I've always wondered why you never had your own. Didn't you want them?" She went completely still and whispered, "What?" And I said, "Kids, didn't you want them?" She was quiet for a long moment, so long that I started to apologize, to take it back, to fill the uncomfortable silence with nervous chatter, but then she spoke and said, "Emily, there's something I need to tell you," and the story she told me that night changed everything. In 1989, Susan Patterson was 22 years old, fresh out of college and living in Chicago. She had a degree in education and a job teaching second grade at a public school on the South Side. She loved her students, loved her tiny apartment in Lincoln Park, loved the energy and excitement of city life. She was young and free and full of hope, and she was pregnant. The father was a man she'd dated briefly, a graduate student at Northwestern named David. Charming and smart and full of big promises about their future together. When she told him about the pregnancy, he'd gone pale, muttered something about not being ready, and walked out of her apartment. She never saw him again. A few weeks later she heard through friends that he'd moved to California. No forwarding address, no phone number, nothing. She was alone, scared, and living in Chicago with no family nearby to help. Her parents were in Ohio, retired and struggling with health issues. She couldn't burden them with this, she couldn't burden anyone. Her best friend from college, Jennifer, had just gotten married and was living in the Detroit suburbs with her new husband Michael. They were happy, building their life together, trying to start a family of their own. When Susan called her sobbing, Jennifer didn't hesitate. She drove to Chicago that same night, 4 hours through rain and darkness, arriving at Susan's apartment at 2 a.m. and said, "I'll help you, whatever you need, we'll figure this out together." Susan considered her options. They were limited and they were all terrible. She could keep the baby, but she had no money, no support system, no way to provide for a child while working a teacher's salary. She could put the baby up for adoption, but the thought of her child growing up, never knowing her, never knowing how much she was loved, was unbearable. She'd spend the rest of her life wondering, aching, hoping. Jennifer had another idea. She said, "Michael and I have been trying to have a baby and it's not working. We've seen specialists, done tests. The doctors say it might never work." She took Susan's hands in hers and said, "What if we raised the baby together? You'd still be in the baby's life, you'd be Aunt Susan, you'd visit, you'd call, you'd watch the baby grow up, but the baby would have 2 parents, a stable home, everything a child deserves. We'd give your baby the life you want to give but can't, not yet, maybe not ever." Susan was shocked at first, then horrified, then slowly intrigued. She whispered, "You'd do that? You'd raise my baby as your own?" And Jennifer said, "I'd love that baby like my own, because it would be part of you, and I love you like a sister." They talked all night and all the next day and all the next night. They talked about logistics, about secrets, about the future. They talked about what Susan's role would be, how often she'd visit, how they'd explain it to family and friends. They talked about the risks, the lies, the weight of carrying such a secret for decades. In the end they made a pact, a secret they'd carry for the rest of their lives. Susan would have the baby, Jennifer and Michael would raise it. Susan would be Aunt Susan, close, loving, present, but never mother, and no one would ever know the truth. 9 months later, on October 12, 1990, I was born at St. Joseph Mercy Hospital in Ann Arbor. Susan held me for exactly 1 hour, one precious agonizing hour, before placing me in Jennifer's arms. Jennifer named me Emily after her own grandmother and took me home to the house with the white picket fence in Birmingham, and Aunt Susan drove back to Chicago alone. I don't remember much about the rest of my wedding night. I know I cried and Susan cried, and we stood on that terrace for what felt like hours holding each other while the reception went on inside without us. I know my mother Jennifer came looking for us, took one look at our faces and burst into tears herself and whispered, "You told her?" And Susan whispered back, she asked. That night the 3 of us sat in a hotel room until dawn, talking, crying, trying to piece together 30 years of lies. Jennifer told me her side of the story, how she'd loved me instantly, completely, from the moment Susan placed me in her arms, how she'd never once regretted their decision, how she'd prayed every day that I'd never have to know the truth because she was terrified of losing me. She said, "I know we should have told you. I know secrets like this have a way of coming out, but every year that passed made it harder. You were so happy, so loved. I didn't want to shatter that. I didn't want you to ever feel confused about who your mother was." Susan told me about the years of watching me grow up from afar, about the phone calls she'd make to Jennifer every night just to hear about my day, about the birthdays she'd spend alone in her Chicago apartment looking at photos of me opening presents she'd sent, about the ache she carried with her, always the ache of loving a child she couldn't claim as her own, and she said I'd do it again 1,000 times, I'd do it again. You had a wonderful childhood, Emily, you had 2 parents who adored you, a stable home, every opportunity. That's what I wanted for you, that's what Jennifer and Michael gave you. My pain was worth it, and my father Michael, when he found out I knew, sat me down and told me his version too. How he'd loved Susan like a sister, how he'd agreed to the plan without hesitation, how he'd never once thought of me as anything but his daughter. He said, we did it for you, everything we did, every choice we made, it was because we loved you, all 3 of us. The weeks after the wedding were the hardest of my life. I was married now happily to a man who held me while I cried and listened while I talked and never once made me feel crazy for the emotional whirlwind I was experiencing, but I was also unmoored, unanchored, unsure of who I was anymore. The woman I'd called mom my whole life wasn't my mother, the woman I'd called aunt was, and the man I'd called dad, well, he was still my dad, but suddenly I had questions about him too. Did he love me any less knowing I wasn't his biological child? Had he ever resented the arrangement? Had he ever looked at me and seen someone else's daughter? I went through all the stages of grief, sometimes in the same day. Denial, this can't be true, they're lying or mistaken, maybe I'm misunderstanding, maybe Susan meant something else, maybe I dreamed the whole conversation. Anger. How could they take away my choice, my knowledge, my identity? Every memory I have is tainted now. Every moment of my life was built on a foundation of lies. Bargaining, if I just pretend it didn't happen, maybe things can go back to normal. If I never mention it again, maybe we can all forget. Maybe ignorance really is bliss. Depression, I don't know who I am anymore. Nothing in my life is real. My name isn't really mine. My history isn't really mine. I'm a stranger to myself. Acceptance, they did what they thought was best. They loved me, they still love me. Love is what matters. Biology is just biology. The acceptance part took the longest. I saw a therapist for 6 months, a kind woman named Dr. Reynolds who specialized in family secrets and identity issues. She helped me understand that my reaction was normal, that there was no right or wrong way to process something like this. She gave me permission to feel everything, the anger, the sadness, the confusion, and eventually the forgiveness. I joined online support groups for people who discovered similar secrets: adoption secrets, donor conception secrets, NPE secrets. I found hundreds of people with stories like mine, people who discovered through DNA tests or deathbed confessions that their parents weren't who they thought they were. I read their stories, shared my own, and found comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. I read books about family secrets and their psychological impact. I learned that millions of families have secrets, millions of children grow up not knowing the truth about their origins. DNA testing has exposed thousands of these secrets in recent years, shattering families and identities but also creating new connections and new understandings. At least my secret came out gently from people who loved me. At least I didn't find out from a 23andMe test or a random Facebook message from a stranger. At least I had the chance to hear their stories, to ask my questions, to process the truth with the people who'd lived it. One of the most complicated parts of this journey was deciding whether to find my biological father. Susan had told me everything she knew about him. His name was David, he was from California, he'd been a graduate student at Northwestern, and he'd disappeared as soon as she told him she was pregnant. She didn't know his last name, didn't know where he'd gone, didn't know anything else. For months I debated whether to search. Part of me was curious, he was half of my DNA, half of who I was. Part of me was angry he'd abandoned Susan when she needed him most. Part of me was scared. What if he didn't want to know me? What if he had a whole other family? What if he rejected me twice? With Susan's blessing I started digging. I used online genealogy sites, searched public records, even hired a private investigator. It took nearly a year, but eventually I found him. His full name was David Reynolds. He lived in San Diego, California with a wife and 2 kids. He was a dentist. He coached his son's little league team. He went to church on Sundays. He'd never told anyone about the pregnancy in Chicago, about the daughter he'd left behind. I emailed him. It was the most terrifying email I've ever written. Dear David, you don't know me, but my name is Emily Thompson. I believe you knew my biological mother, Susan Patterson. In 1989 I was born on October 12, 1990. I think you might be my father. I'm not looking for anything, not money, not a relationship, not an explanation. I just wanted you to know I exist. He replied 3 days later. His email was short, cautious, and a little afraid. Emily, thank you for reaching out. This comes as a complete shock. I was very young back then and I made terrible choices that I've regretted for decades. I'd like to talk more if you're open to it. We exchanged emails for a few months, then phone calls, then eventually I flew to San Diego to meet him. it was strange awkward. He was a stranger to me, a kind well-meaning stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. We had coffee, we talked about our lives, he showed me photos of his kids, my half-siblings. He apologized for abandoning Susan, for never looking back, for missing 30 years of my life. He said I was a coward. I was 23 years old and I panicked. I've thought about that decision every day since. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to scream at him. Mostly I just felt empty, like meeting him didn't fill any hole I had, like he was just a character in a story, not someone who mattered in my daily life. We're still in touch, sort of. He sends birthday cards and Christmas presents. We exchange emails a few times a year, but we're not close. He's not my dad. Michael is my dad. He's just a biological fact, a piece of my origin story that doesn't define who I am. Rebuilding my relationships with Jennifer and Susan wasn't easy. It took time, patience, and a lot of hard conversations. With Jennifer, my mom, the woman who raised me, I had to work through feelings of betrayal. She'd lied to me every day of my life, but she'd also loved me, sacrificed for me, been there for every scraped knee and broken heart and triumph and tragedy. She was my mother in every way that mattered. She said I'm sorry over and over. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if you never knew, you'd never have to deal with the confusion, the questions, the pain. I see now that I was wrong. I should have told you. I should have trusted you with the truth. I forgave her. It took time, but I forgave her, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but gradually over months and years. Every time she showed up for me, every time she loved me without condition, every time she was simply my mom, the forgiveness grew a little deeper. With Susan, my biological mother, my aunt, my mysterious loving presence, the relationship was more complicated. Suddenly, I had a second mother and I didn't know what to do with her. Did I call her mom now? Did I treat her differently? Did I owe her something I hadn't owed her before? Did I need to make up for all those years when she watched from a distance? We took it slow. We talked on the phone more often and she started visiting more frequently, not just once a month but every other weekend. Sometimes we went to lunch together, just the two of us. We took walks in the park. We sat on my porch and talked for hours about nothing and everything. Susan told me about her life, the real unvarnished version, about the years of loneliness, of longing, of loving me from a distance, about the boyfriends who couldn't understand why she was so devoted to her best friend's daughter, why she spent so much time in Detroit, why she seemed to have this other life they couldn't access, about the therapy she'd gone through to process her decision, to make peace with it, to find a way to be happy despite the hole in her heart. She said, I don't regret it. I've never regretted it. You had a wonderful childhood. You had two parents who adored you, a stable home, every opportunity. That's what I wanted for you. That's what Jennifer and Michael gave you. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. One of the hardest parts of this journey was understanding that everyone in this story was both right and wrong. Jennifer was right to love me unconditionally, to raise me as her own, to give me the stable, happy childhood she'd promised Susan, but she was wrong to keep the secret for so long, to let fear dictate her choices, to deny me the truth about my own identity. Susan was right to want the best for me, to sacrifice her own happiness for my well-being, to stay close and loving even when it broke her heart, but she was complicit in the secret too. She could have told me at any point, she chose not to. Michael was right to support his wife and her best friend, to be the father I needed, to love me without reservation, but he was part of the lie too. He nodded along with the story of my birth for 30 years. And I was right to be angry, to feel betrayed, to grieve the loss of the story I'd believed my whole life, but I was also wrong to let that anger consume me, to push them away when they were trying to make amends, to forget that they'd done what they did out of love, not malice. Understanding all of this, holding all of it at once, was the hardest part, learning to see the nuance, the complexity, the humanity in everyone's choices, learning that life isn't black and white, that people can love you deeply and still hurt you deeply, that the two can coexist. It's been 5 years since that night on the wedding terrace. I'm 35 now, married to Christopher, and we have a 2-year-old daughter named Lily. She arrived on a rainy April morning, screaming her way into the world with lungs that impressed even the nurses. She has my eyes, Susan's eyes, and my smile, and a laugh that lights up the room. She's the center of our universe, the reason we get up in the morning, the best thing we've ever done. Jennifer is Grammy. She watches Lily 2 days a week while Christopher and I work, takes her to the park, reads her stories, spoils her rotten with cookies and toys and unlimited screen time. She's the best grandmother a child could ask for, patient, loving, endlessly available. She and Lily have a bond that's beautiful to watch, a continuation of the love Jennifer has always given so freely. Susan is Grandma Susan. She moved from Chicago to our suburb last year, selling the apartment she'd lived in for 40 years to buy a small house just 15 minutes away. She's at our house at least twice a week, playing with Lily, helping with dinner, being the loving presence she's always been. She takes Lily on grandma dates to the zoo, the children's museum, the park. She bakes cookies with her just like she baked with me. She reads her stories and sings her songs and loves her with that same intense, almost painful love I've known my whole life. Lily doesn't know the full story yet. She's too young to. Her Grammy is Grammy and Grandma Susan is Grandma Susan, and they're both just people who love her. But someday when she's old enough to understand, maybe 10 or 12 or 15, whenever it feels right, we'll tell her, all of us together, Jennifer, Susan, Michael, Christopher and me, will sit her down and explain that families come in all shapes and sizes, that love is what matters, that she is surrounded by people who adore her. We won't make the same mistake twice. We won't keep secrets. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that family secrets have a way of coming out eventually. You can bury them deep, build your life on top of them, pretend they don't exist. You can swear everyone to silence, create elaborate lies, maintain the fiction for decades, but secrets are heavy. They shift and strain, and eventually, inevitably, they surface. A chance discovery, a deathbed confession, a DNA test taken on a whim, and when they emerge, they can shatter everything, but they can also heal. Knowing the truth hasn't destroyed my family, it's made us closer. It's forced us to have honest conversations we should have had years ago. It's given me two mothers instead of one, two women who love me with an intensity that still takes my breath away. Jennifer isn't my biological mother, but she's my mom. She's the one who nursed me through chickenpox, who stayed up late helping with school projects, who taught me to drive, who held me when my first boyfriend broke my heart. She's the one who showed up for every milestone, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, who loved me without condition or reservation. She's my mother in every way that counts. Susan is my biological mother, but she's also my friend, my confidant, my role model. She's the one who gave me life, who made the ultimate sacrifice so I could have a better one. She's the one who loved me from afar for 30 years, who never stopped showing up, who gave up her own chance at motherhood so I could have the childhood she couldn't provide. She's my mother in a different way, but no less real. And Michael, my dad, is still my dad. He's the same man who taught me to fish, who walked me down the aisle, who cries every time he sees Lily. He's the same man who held me when I was scared, who cheered at my soccer games, who sat through countless dance recitals with a patient smile. Biology doesn't change any of that. If you're keeping a secret from someone you love, I understand why. You're trying to protect them, you're trying to protect yourself, you're afraid of what might happen if the truth comes out, afraid of anger, of rejection, of losing the life you've built. You tell yourself it's for the best, that some things are better left unknown, that love means keeping certain truths hidden. But here's what I've learned: the truth is almost always better than the lie, not easier, not less painful, but better, because living with a secret means living with fear, fear of discovery, fear of the moment when it all comes crashing down, and that fear poisons everything. It poisons your relationships, your peace of mind, your ability to be truly present with the people you love. It creates distance where there should be closeness, suspicion where there should be trust. My parents, all three of them, lived with that fear for 30 years, 30 years of waiting for the other shoe to drop, 30 years of wondering if today would be the day I found out, 30 years of holding their breath, bracing for impact. I wish they hadn't. I wish they'd trusted me with the truth sooner. I wish they'd given me more years of honest relationship instead of decades built on a lie. But I also understand why they didn't. They were scared. They were trying to protect me. They did what they thought was best, and in the end their love was strong enough to survive the truth. Today I'm sitting on my back porch watching Lily play in the yard. It's a warm September afternoon, the kind of golden Michigan day that makes you grateful to be alive. The leaves are just starting to turn, hints of orange and red appearing at the edges. Jennifer is pushing Lily on the swing, laughing at something Lily just said. Lily is shrieking with delight, begging to go higher, higher, higher. Susan is inside baking cookies, the same chocolate chip recipe she taught me when I was 13. I can smell them through the open kitchen window, butter and sugar and vanilla, the smell of my childhood, the smell of love. My phone buzzes. It's a text from my dad saying, "On my way over, save me a cookie." I smile, typing back, "Hurry up or they'll be gone." This is my family, complicated, unconventional, messy, built on a secret that could have destroyed us but instead brought us closer, held together not by biology but by choice, by love, by the daily, ordinary, extraordinary work of showing up for each other. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Lily will have questions someday, or struggles, or moments of confusion about who she belongs to. But I do know this: will face them together, all of us. No more lies, no more secrets, just the messy, beautiful, complicated truth of who we are. My aunt was actually my mother, and now finally everyone knows.